But, Craig, here is the top 25 that is out, college football's top 25. Georgia, two-time defending champions, trying to do something no one has ever done before in major college football. Michigan, their highest preseason ranking since 1991. Ohio State, Alabama, their lowest preseason ranking. Think about this. Since 2009, the year they won the national title, and then there's LSU. Teams from the Big 12, Texas at 11. You have Utah, who will be at 14, Kansas State, TCU, Oklahoma, 16, 17, and 20. There's A&M at 23. Right outside, which would have been 26th, the Red Raiders of Lubbock and Texas Tech University. There is, and we'll break this down. Craig, your thoughts about a couple of them, if you want, inside that image of the top 25.
Yeah, I mean, Bama being at 4 immediately jumped out to me just because we are so used to seeing them at 1 or 2. And so to see them, behind 3 teams, that would be great for most programs. But for Alabama, that does sort of seem like, whoa, wait a second, why are they all the way at 4? So, yeah, that's wild to see that. I mean, Georgia's clearly, the program now in college football. But, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, all that makes sense. Just strange to see Bama kind of sliding a little bit. Cool to see some teams like, Southern Cal and Florida State who haven't necessarily, been in the mix consistently these last few years. To have them in the top 10, I think is, cool to see that once again. Texas at 11. It's pretty high, man. I mean, that's in line with the big expectations that I think people have for them, clearly. And I know that I do. I know that I have them as my Big 12 champs. I think, obviously the majority of people do. That's why they were the, preseason favorites, which hasn't been the case for many years now. But it's just all the stars seem to have aligned. I mean, everywhere you look, they've got talent, but more than just the talking point that they've typically had of, they've got talent. No, they've got like real deal talent all over the place. Not to mention, even a minor concern like, well, Gary Patterson's he's back, or potentially Wayne coming back. So I just feel like everything's kind of going their way. But 11, that's pretty high. Look at Utah. I mean, you talk about, the great story that the Pac-12 is going to be this year, but even looking beyond that with, knowing that the Utes are going to be in the Big 12 come next season, good to see them representing up in the top half of the poll. Beyond that, K-State, TCU, I think both of those teams are going to be really, really good. Oregon State, I know that it's a tough time for them right now, but as we've been mentioning, they got a hell of a football team that's going to help them wade through whatever this nonsense is that they're dealing with conference realignment-wise. But they've got a special football season potentially in store. OU, the closer we get to the season, the more I'm warming up to the idea of them being better than I've expected throughout the offseason. And, hey, good for Tulane there in the back end of the rankings there and just in front of them, A&M with Jimbo and some huge expectations. So, yeah, I mean, we could unpack this for the next 3 hours, but there's a lot of interesting things about that poll.
SEC 6 teams, Big 12 with 4, Big 10, Pac-12 with 5, ACC 3, AAC with Tulane at 1, and Independent Notre Dame at 1. Lowest preseason ranking for Alabama since 2009. That might be historic, even when teams have dominated during certain rivalries. Also, Oklahoma has had the most preseason number 1 rankings in AP poll history. We do have Chip Towers from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Georgia 1. Oklahoma, Alabama from 10 to 9. Ohio State. In fact, Alabama during this run has been ranked number 1 6 times, I think, since 2012 or 13. Then there's Ohio State, USC, Florida State, Nebraska, Notre Dame at 5, then Florida, Miami, Clemson, Georgia, and Michigan. As good as Georgia's been, this is only the second time in their schools and program history that they've been ranked number 1 in the preseason poll. Of Herschel Walker year, they weren't ranked number 1. He jumped into college football with both feet in a spectacular freshman year. Michigan a couple of different times. Now, which top 10 team do you think, if you wouldn't mind, Garrett, put it back up, which top 10 team will finish unranked every year for the past 21 seasons, except 2019? At least one preseason top 10 team finished unranked. Last year, 3. A&M, Baylor, and Oklahoma started inside the top 10, and all 3 of them ended outside of the poll.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that Baylor was a top 10 team last year. Like that's That's wild given how the season ended up going, but that's why it was even more nightmarish as it went along, was that they started off with such great expectations. I'd probably have to sit and think on this a little bit, but limited to the top 10, I mean, I feel pretty good about that top 5, and it would have to come from that second half. I don't know, maybe Penn State or Washington. I think, there's a case to be had for 5 through 10 or 6 through 10, excuse me. And I'm sure there's cases to be made, for one of the top 5 or a couple of the top 5 maybe as well. But I don't really see it from the top 5. But I do see, the possibilities there in that second half. And I don't know, maybe more so with Penn State and Washington than I do the 3 others. So, yeah, go ahead and give me them. But that's something that maybe if I stewed on it long enough, I'd flip it around a little bit. But just on the surface, that's where my head's at.
The Big Ten has numbers 2, 3, and 7 inside the top 10. The SEC has numbers 1, 4, and 5 inside the top 10. So there you have the Pac-12 with SC and Washington. So 3 of the top 7 of the Big Ten, perhaps that will be hard to hold up, or 3 of the top 5 in the SEC, maybe that will be hard to hold up with no, to me, arguments with much of what we see at that point. Now, the opposite. Last year, half of the final top 25 teams to finish inside the top 10 teams that were unranked. The opposite. TCU, Tennessee, Penn State, Washington, and Tulane all began last year unranked and finished inside of the top 25. In fact, inside the top 10. That's another Brett McMurphy special, a little historical trend. Now, here's from Brett McMurphy again. If you're looking for a national champion, history says it's either Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, USC, Penn State. That makes a lot of sense. But since 2004, every national champ was ranked among the AP preseason polls top 7 other than Auburn in 2010 and FSU in 2013. So if you're in the top 7, other than twice since 2004, nearly 20 years, one of those teams has won the national title except a couple of different years.
Well, I mean, that sounds crazy, and it sounds like it's an amazing stat, but I mean, is it really all that amazing when you think about it, given how consistently it's been kind of the same teams that win the national titles? You know what I mean? So when you're looking at the odds this year and you go, all right, you can have the rest of the field, but give me Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, SC, and Penn State. Do you think I have a good chance of getting that right? I think I have a pretty good chance of getting that right. So that is a fun statistic, and there's something to that. But I do also think it's not like the Super Bowl, where it's like you have to really guess on a year-to-year basis of who's going to be great. In college football, yeah, there's misses. We didn't have TCU ranked and they ended up in the national championship game. That's a pretty massive whiff on everybody's part. We had Baylor top 10 and they finished 6 and 7. That's a pretty massive whiff on everybody's part. But if you're picking a national champion in college football, it's like, give me every, major blue blood who's won one in the last, 10 years and others who have been, flirting with it or have won titles themselves. And I feel like I'm going to have a pretty good shot. Now, I could see it. I could see it potentially being, a Texas and sneaks in there who's not in the top 7 or whatever, I guess. Or let's see, like a Clemson or a Washington or a Tennessee or something like that. But, yeah, give me Georgia, give me Bama, give me Ohio State, give me Michigan, LSU, Southern Cal, Penn State. I think I'm probably going to have the national champion in that mix more often than not.
But now, Garrett, the 2 exceptions, 2010 Auburn and 2013 Florida State. Who were their quarterbacks?
Jameis and Cam.
Yeah. All right. So those are once in a lifetime. Cam was a once in a lifetime guy for Auburn, and Jameis had a spectacular year for Florida State. So the quarterback play allowed them to elevate from where they started the year. FSU was ranked 11, and then obviously Auburn in 2010 when Cam was still kind of an unknown. Everyone knew how good he was, but they were ranked 22nd.
Yeah, he's a pretty major star. I mean, Jameis was too. So they had, I'd say, once in a lifetime. You can debate that, I guess, because those programs have had a lot of talented players roll through. But, I mean, those are about as once in a lifetime type players that both those programs can boast here recently. So yeah, all it takes, I mean, same thing in college football, not as much in the NFL, is you have that transcendent superstar and he can take you a long ways. And both those guys certainly did that for those programs.
All right. One more college